Chapter 1. Frostbite. I didn't think my day could get any worse until my best friend told me she might be going crazy again. What did you say? I stood in the lobby of her dorm, leaning over one of my boots and adjusting it. Jerking my head up, I peered at her through my tangle of dark hair covering my face. I'd fallen asleep after school and had skipped using a hairbrush in order to make it out the door in time. Lissa's platinum blonde hair was smooth and perfect, of course, hanging over her shoulders like a bridal veil as she watched me with amusement. I said that I think my pills might not be working as well anymore. I straightened up and shook the hair out of my face. What does that mean? I asked. Around us, Moro hurried past, on their way to meet their friends or go to dinner. Have you started, I lowered my voice. Have you started getting your powers back? She shook her head, and I saw a flash of regret in her eyes. No, I feel closer to the magic, but I still can't use it. Mostly what I'm noticing lately is a little more stuff, I'm getting more depressed now and then. Nothing even close to what I used to be, she added hastily, seeing my face. Before she had gone on her pills, Lissa's moods could get so low that she cut herself. It's just there, a little more than it was. What about the other thing you used to get? Anxiety? Delusional thinking? Lissa laughed, not taking any of this as seriously as I was. You sound like you've been reading psychiatric textbooks. Actually, I had been reading them. I'm just worried about you. If you think the pills aren't working anymore, we need to tell someone. No, she said hastily. I'm fine, really. It's still working, just not quite as much. I don't think we should panic yet, especially you. Not today, at least. Her change of subject worked. I found out an hour ago that I would be taking my qualifier today. It was an exam, or rather an interview, all novice guardians were required to pass during junior year at St. Vladimir's. Since I'd been off hiding Lissa last year, I'd missed mine. Today, I was being taken to a guardian somewhere off campus who would administer the tests to me. Thanks for the notice, guys. Don't worry about me, Lissa repeated, smiling. I'll let you know if it gets worse. Okay, I said reluctantly. Just to be safe, though, I opened my senses and allowed myself to truly feel through our psychiatric bond. She had been telling me the truth. She was calm and happy. This morning, nothing to worry about, but far back in her mind, I sensed a knot of dark, uneasy feeling. It wasn't consuming her or anything, but it had the same feeling as the bouts of depression and anger she used to get. It was only a trickle, but I didn't like it. I didn't want it there at all. I tried pushing further inside of her head to get a better feel for her emotions, and suddenly I had a weird experience of touching. A sickening sort of feeling seized me. I jerked my head up. A small shudder ran through my body. You okay? Lissa asked, frowning. You look nauseous all of a sudden. Just nervous for the test, I lied, hastily. I reached out through the bond again. The darkness had completely disappeared, no trace. Maybe there was nothing wrong with her pills after all. I'm fine. She pointed at the clock. You won't be if you don't get a move on soon. Damn it, I swore. She was right. I gave her a quick hug. See you later. Good luck, she called. I hurried off across campus and found my mentor, Dmitry Belikov, waiting aside our Hyundai Pilot. How boring. I suppose I couldn't have expected us to have navigated Montana roads in a Porsche, but it would have been a nice ride to have something cooler. I know, I said, seeing his face. I'm sorry I'm late. I remember then that I had one of the most important tests of my life coming up, and suddenly I forgot all about Lisa and her pills possibly not working. I wanted to protect her, but that couldn't mean much if I couldn't pass high school and actually become a guardian. Dimitri stood there, looking gorgeous as ever. The massive brick building cast a long shadow over us, looming us like some great big inner dust, pre-dawn light. Around us, snow was just beginning to fall. I watched the light. Crystalline flakes drifted gently down. Several landed and promptly melted in his dark hair. Who else is going? I asked. He shrugged. Just me and you. My moon promptly shot up, cheerful, and went straight to aesthetic. Me and Dimitri, alone in a car, this might very well be worth a surprise test. How far is it? Silently begging for it to be a really long drive, like that would take a week, and would involve us staying overnight in a luxury hotel. Maybe we would get stranded in the snowbank, and only our body heat would keep us alive. 5 hours. Oh. A bit less than I hoped for. Still, 5 hours is better than nothing. It didn't rule out the snowbank possibility either. The dim, snowy roads would have been difficult for humans to navigate, but they proven no problem for our damp-haired eyes. I stared ahead, trying not to think about how Dimitri's aftershave filled the car with a clean, sharp sense that made me want to melt. Instead, I tried to focus on the qualifier again. It wasn't the kind of thing you could study for. You either passed it or you didn't. High-up guardians visit novices during their junior year and met individually to discuss students' commitment to being a guardian. I didn't know exactly what was asked, but rumors had trickled down over the years. The older guardians assessed character and dedication, and some novices had been deemed unfit to continue down the guardian pathway. Don't they usually come to the academy? I asked Dimitri. I mean, I'm all for a field trip, but why are we going to them? Actually, you're just going to him, not them. A light Russian accent laced Dimitri's words, their early indication of where he'd grown up. Otherwise, I was pretty sure he spoke English better than I did. Since this is a special case, he's doing us the favor. We are the ones making the trip. Who's here? Arthur Schoenberg. I jerked my gaze up from the road to Dimitri. What? I squealed. Arthur Schoenberg was a legend. He was one of the greatest Strigoi slayers in living Guardian history, and used to be the head of the Guardian Council, the group of people who assigned guardians to Moroi and made the decisions for all of us. He eventually retired and gone back to protecting one of the royal families, the Bannikers. Even retired, I knew he was still lethal. His exploits were part of the curriculum. Wasn't there anyone else available? I asked Dimitri in a small voice. I could see Dimitri hiding a smile. You'll be fine. Besides, if Arthur approves you, that's a great recommendation to have on your record. art. Dimitri was on a first-name basis with one of the most badass guardians around. Of course, Dimitri was pretty badass himself, so I shouldn't have been surprised. Silence fell in the car. I bit my lip, suddenly wondering if I'd be able to meet Arthur Schomburg standards. My grades were good, but the things like running away and getting into fights at school might cast a shadow on how serious I was about my future career. You'll be fine, Dimitri repeated. The good in your records outweighs the bad. It was like he could read my mind sometimes. I smiled a little and dared to peek at him. It was a mistake. The long, lean body, obvious even while sitting. Bottomless, dark eyes. Shoulder-length brown hair tied back at his neck. That hair felt like silk. I knew because I'd run my fingers through it when Victor had ensnared us with the lust charm. With great restraint, I forced myself to start breathing again and looked away. Thanks, Coach, I teased, snuggling back into my seat. I'm here to help, he replied. His voice was light and relaxed, rare for him. He was usually wound up tight, ready for an attack. Probably he figured he was safe inside a Hyundai, or at least as safe as he could be around me. I wasn't the only one who had trouble ignoring the romantic tension between us. You know what would really help? I asked, not meeting his eyes. If you turned off this crap music and put something on that came off after the Berlin Wall went down. Dimitri laughed. Your worst class is history, yet somehow you know everything about Eastern Europe. Hey, gotta have material for my jokes, comrade. Still smiling, he turned the radio dial to a country station. Hey, this isn't what I had in mind, I explained. I could tell he was on the verge of laughing again. Pick. It's one or the other. I sighed. Go back, 80s stuff. He flipped the dial and I crossed my arms over my chest as some vaguely Eastern sounding band sang about how videos had killed the radio star. I wish someone would kill this radio. Suddenly, 5 hours didn't seem so short as I thought. Arthur and his family he protected lived in a small town along I-90, not far from Billing. The general Moray opinion was split on places to live. Some argued that big cities were the best since they allowed vampires to be lost in the crowd. Nocturnal activities didn't raise so much attention. Other Moray, like this family, apparently opted for a less populated town, believing that if there were fewer people to notice you, then you were less likely to be noticed. I convinced Dimitri to stop for food at a 24-hour diner along the way, and between that and stopping to buy gas, it was around noon when we arrived. The house was built in a Rambler style, all one level with grey-stained wood siding and big bay windows, tinted to block sunlight. Of course, it looked new and expensive, and even out in the middle of nowhere. It was about what I'd expect for a member of a royal family. I jumped down from the pilot, my boots sinking through an inch of smooth snow and crunching on the gravel of the driveway. The day was still silent, save for the occasional breath of wind. Dimitri and I walked up to the house, following the River Rock sidewalk that cut through the front yard. I could see him sliding into his business mode, but his overall attitude was as cheery as mine. We've both taken a kind of guilty satisfaction in the pleasant car ride. My foot slipped on the ice-covered walkside, and Dimitri instinctively reached out to steady me. I had a weird moment of déjà vu, flashing back to the first night we'd met, but when he also saved me from a similar fall. Freezing temperatures or not, his hand felt warm on my arm, even though the layered down in the parking coat. "You okay?" He released his hold. To my dismay. "Yeah," I said, casting accusing eyes at the icy walkway. "Haven't these people ever heard of salt?" I meant it jokingly, but Dimitri suddenly stopped walking. I instantly came to a halt too. His expression became tense and alert. He turned his head, eyes searching the broad, white plains surrounding us before settling back on the house. I wanted to ask a question, but something in his posture told me to stay silent. He studied the building for almost a minute, looked down at the icy walkway, then glanced back at the driveway, covered in a sheet of snow, broken only by footsteps. Cautiously, he approached the front door, and I followed. He stopped again, this time to study the door. It wasn't open, but it wasn't entirely shut either. It looked like it had been closed in a haste, not sealing. Further examination showed scuffs along the door edge, as though it had been forced at some point. A slight nudge would open it. Dimitri lightly ran his fingers along where the door met its frame, his breath making a small cloud in the air. When he touched the door, the handle jiggled a little, like it had been broken. Finally, he said quietly, "Rose, go wait in the car." But go, one word, but one word filled with power. In that slight syllable, I was reminded of the man I'd seen throw people around and stake a strigoi. I backed up, walking on the snow-covered lawn rather than risk the sidewalk. Dimitri stood where he was, not moving until I slipped back into the car, closing the door as softly as possible. Then, with gentleness of movements, he pushed on the barely held door and disappeared inside. Burning with curiosity, I counted to 10, then climbed out of the car. I knew better than to go after him, but I had to know what was going on with this house. The neglected sidewalk and driveway indicated that no one had been home for a couple of days, although it could also mean that the Batikins simply never left the house. It was possible, I suppose, but they'd been the victims of an ordinary break-in by humans. It was also possible that something had scared them off, say like strigoi. I knew that possibly was what had made Dimitri's face go so grim, but it seemed unlikely scenario with Archer Schomburg on duty. Standing on the driveway, I glanced up at the sky. The light was so bleak and watery, but it was there. Noon, the sun's highest point today. Strigoi couldn't be out in the sun. I didn't need to fear them, only Dimitri's anger. I circled around the right side of the house, walking in much deeper snow, almost a foot of it. Nothing else weird about the house struck me. Icicles hung from the eaves and the tinted windows relieved no secrets. My foot suddenly hit something, and I looked down. There, half buried in the snow, was a silver stake. It had been driven into the ground. I picked it up and brushed the snow off it, frowning. What was a stake doing out here? Silver stakes were vulnerable. They were a guardian's most deadly weapon, capable of killing a Strigoi with a single strike through the heart. When they were forged, 4 Moroi charmed them with the magic from each of the 4 elements. I hadn't learned to use one yet, but gripping it in my hand, I suddenly felt safer as I continued my survey. A large patio door leaned from the back of the house to the wooden deck that probably would have been a lot fun to hang out on in the summer, but the patio glass had been broken, so much so that a person could easily get through the jagged hole. I crept up the back steps, careful of the ice, knowing I was going to get in major trouble when Dimitri found out what I was doing. In spite of the cold, sweat poured from my neck. Daylight, daylight, I reminded myself. Nothing to worry about. I reached the patio and studied the dark glass. I couldn't tell what had broken it. Just inside, snow had blown in and made a small drift of pale blue carpet. I tugged on the door handle, but it was locked. Not that that mattered with the hole that big. Careful of the sharp edges, I reached through the opening and unlocked the handle latch from the inside. I removed my hand just as carefully as I pulled open and slid the door. It hissed slightly along its tracks, a quiet sound that nonetheless seemed too loud in the eerie silence. I stepped through the doorway, standing in the patch of sunlight that had been cast inside by opening the door. My eyes adjusted from the sun to the dimness within. Wind swelled through the open patio, dancing with the curtains around me. I was in the living room. It had all the ordinary items one might expect: a couch, TV, rocking chair, and a body. It was a woman. She laid on her back in front of the TV, her hair spilling on the floor around her. Her wide eyes stared upwards, blankly, her face pale, too pale, even for Moroi. For a moment I thought her long hair was covering her neck too, until I realized that the darkness across her skin was blood, dry blood. Her throat had been ripped out. The horrible scene was so surreal that I didn't even realize what I was seeing at first. With her posture, the woman might very well have been sleeping. Then I took in the other body, a man, on his side a couple of feet away, dark blood staining the carpet around him. Another body was slumped beside the couch, small, child-size. Across the room was another, and another. There were bodies everywhere, bodies and blood. The scale of the death around me suddenly registered, and my heart began pounding. No, it wasn't possible. It was day. Bad things couldn't happen in daylight. The scream started to rise in my throat, suddenly halted when a gloved hand came from behind me and closed over my mouth. I started to struggle. Then I smelt Dimitri's aftershave. Why? He asked. Don't you ever listen? You'd be dead if they were still here. I couldn't answer, both because of the hand and my own shock. I've seen someone die once, but never seen death of this magnitude. After almost a minute, Dimitri finally removed his hand, but stayed close behind me. I didn't want to look anymore, but I seemed unable to drag my eyes away from the scene before me. Bodies were everywhere, bodies and blood. Finally, I turned towards him. It's daytime, I whispered. Nothing bad ever happens in daytime. I heard the desperation in my voice. A little girl pleads that someone would say this was all a bad dream. Bad things can happen any time, he told me, and this didn't happen during the day. probably happened a couple of nights ago. I dared a peek back at the bodies and felt my stomach twist. 2 days? 2 days to be dead? To have your existence scuffed out without anyone in the world ever knowing? You were gone? My eyes fell on the man near the room entrance to the hall. He was tall, too well built to be a Moroi. Dimitri must have noticed where I looked. Arthur Schongberg, he said. I stared at Arthur's bloody throat. He's dead, I said, as though it wasn't perfectly obvious. How can he be dead? How could a Strigoi kill Arthur Schongberg? It didn't seem possible. You couldn't kill a legend. Dimitri didn't answer. Instead, he moved his hands down and closed around where my own held the stake. I flinched. Where did you get this? He asked. I loosed my grip and let him take the stake. Outside on the ground? He held up the stake, studying its surface as it shone in the light. It broke the ward. My mind, still stunned, took a moment to process what he said. Then I got it. Wards were magic rings cast by Moroi, like the stakes. They were made using magic from all 4 elements. They required strong Moroi magic users, often a couple of each element. The wards could block Strigoi because magic was charged with life, and the Strigoi had none. But wards fade quickly and took a lot of maintenance. Most Moroi didn't use them, but certain places kept them up. St. Vladimir's Academy was ringed with several. There had been a ward here, but it had been shattered when someone drove the stake through it. Their magic conflicted with each other. The stake had won. Strigoi can't touch stakes, I told him. I realized I was using a lot of can and don't statements. It wasn't easy having your core belief changed. And no Moro Dampiers would do it. A human might. And then his eyes. Humans don't help Strigoi. I stopped. There was it again. Don't. But I couldn't help it. The one thing we could count on in the fight against Strigoi was their limitations, sunlight, wards, stake, magic, etc. We used their weaknesses against them. If they had other humans who would help them and weren't affected by those limitations. Dimitri's face was stern, still ready for anything, but the tiniest spark of sympathy flashed in his dark eyes as he watched me wage my mental battle. This changes everything, doesn't it? I asked. Yeah, he said, it does. Chapter 1.